Welcome to our event. Thank you, Bill Cibes, a celebration of words and the man, brought to you by the nationally renowned literary journal Connecticut Review. It's what it looks like if you didn't pick up one. Nice picture of Bill inside. And the Impact Connecticut State University Young Writers Trust. My name is Andy Tebow. I'm a consulting editor for Connecticut Review and chairman of the Young Writers Trust. Since 1998, the Trust has given more than $118,000 to Connecticut's best young poets and writers. This year, with the help of generous sponsors, we will send 2 young writers and 2 parents to Dublin to join in festivities for the International Impact Dublin Literary Award, which at 100,000 euros is the world's largest prize for a single work of fiction. And we hope some of our young writers win that prize someday. The Young Writers Trust will also give another $17,000 this year to young writers in Connecticut. $1,000 of that will be for a prototype competition co-sponsored by the Litchfield Morris Rotary in French and Spanish. Just a few housekeeping details and some brief remarks before we bring on poets and writers for Bill. We'll start with our Connecticut Poet Laureate Marilyn Nelson, followed by young writers who have been state champions in our competition, the poet and author Franz Dusky, CSU professor and poet Vivian Shipley. We conclude with the novelist Wally Lamb reading from a new work in progress. There will also be a short break for a trip to the dessert and coffee bar around 8:15 p.m. At the rear of the ballroom, we have the fabulous Rainey Fay of the Rainey Fay Bookstore and Gallery, who's selling books. If you like books, she's got them. They include books by Wally Lamb, Vivian Shipley, Marilyn Nelson, Rand Cooper, a bunch of other people. I have a letter from Connecticut Review. January 6, 2006. Dear Chancellor Cibes, this is from John Briggs, the senior editor. Speaking for the editorial board of Connecticut Review, we welcome the opportunity to thank you once again, as we did in the pages of our fall 2005 issue, for your strong support of creative writing and free expression. In our opinion, you have quietly been a major force for initiatives in the literary arts and cultural life in Connecticut. You've had a particularly strong commitment to young people and the importance of arts in their lives. In this day and age, that is not a common commitment, and we heartily thank you for it. The editorial board of Connecticut Review, Vivian Shipley, Stuart Barnett, Meredith Claremont-Ferrand, and myself, who is John Briggs. Not really, but that's who wrote it. Wish you all the best in your retirement. And I have an original copy I'll give to you later. Entry forms for the Young Writers Competition are available from the fabulous Rainey Fay. They're online at www.ctyoungwriters.org, and they'll also be available at all the retail outlets of the Connecticut State Police, which are the 12 barracks from Litchfield to Danielson, from Bridgeport to Montville, Canaan, Westbrook. If you've been there, you know where they are. Since we went statewide, the state police have been handing out entry forms, and actually 17 members of a Southbury swim team once went to the barracks to pick up their entry forms. The deadline is February 6th postmark. ctyoungwriters.org. Connecticut Review is connecticutreview.com. What is Impact? How did all this get started? Impact stands for Improved Management, Profitability, and Control. That means they save companies a lot of money. In Indonesia, for example, they saved Mattel $7 million in 1 year by telling the bosses, don't go to meetings 95% of the time and yell at people the other 5%. Get on the floor, reward workers for bringing their problems forward, save on raw materials, etc. We went statewide in 2000 because of Bill Cibes. Initially, we were just Litchfield County. There's a guy named El Bardo, the legend, the late Leo Connellan, poet laureate, who brought Bill Cibes to our first dinner. And then Bill said, let's go statewide. Then he went to a meeting with Jim Irwin, the chairman of Impact. Jim Irwin walked out and said, don't bring me to a meeting with that guy again, it just cost me 10 grand a year. Now we have 4 ceremonies at each of the state universities in the spring: Southern, Central, Eastern, and Western. I'll tell you one secret about Bill. Of course, there are many. Rand Cooper knows a lot. Over the years, we've had some glitches in the program. Teachers, English teachers, don't know geography very well. We had one teacher from E.O. Smith who entered one of her kids in Talon County and the other in Windham County. And the kid, before we figured out, both of her kids won. So what do? We don't cut the baby in half. I'm only telling this one secret about it. Bill Cibes dips into his own pocket, writes a check for $1 grand. It wasn't CSU money, it was his own money. So we rewarded both kids. Now we have it here. So that's the kind of guy he is. I'd like to bring up Alan Hoffman of the Connecticut Commission on Culture and Tourism, who will read a proclamation from Governor Rell.
You can give it to Bill.
You think I can read that?
I don't know. Can you read? I came prepared.
All right.
Well, you can hold it.
All right.
Would you stand next to me for
Well,
moral support? Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity, Andy. I bring greetings to Dr. Cibes from my Executive Director, Jennifer Anaskovich, of the Commission on Culture and Tourism. And by way of background, I just want to set up a little bit, and I was happy that Andy mentioned someone who really had in the back of his mind the need for a creative writing program, and that was Leo Connellan. And Leo I came upon just briefly when he was a poet laureate of the state, and struck up a friendship, and certainly we were sad when Leo passed because he did present a very different perspective as a poet. We were invited by Leo, by Andy, and again from Dr. Cibes, from the then former Commission on the Arts, to be part of this program, the Impact Writing Awards, and to basically give our good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will, that the Commission on the Arts, now the Commission on Culture and Tourism, understood that these creative writing programs were very important. What they meant to young writers especially, and what it will mean for the state of Connecticut in terms of our cultural assets. I would like to read for the governor the citation from the state of Connecticut. By Her Excellency M. Jody Rell, an official statement. Whereas Dr. William J. Cibes, Jr., Chancellor of the Connecticut State University System, has had an extraordinary career in public service and has made an immeasurable contribution to the state of Connecticut. And whereas Dr. Cibes received a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Kansas in 1965 and earned a PhD in politics from Princeton University in 1975. And whereas Dr. Cibes began his academic career as a member of the Department of Government at Connecticut College And whereas Dr. Cibes also served for 6 terms as a Connecticut State Representative from New London. And whereas Dr. Cibes was appointed by Governor Weicker to be the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management in 1991, where he remained until he was selected to be the President, then Chancellor, of the Connecticut State University System. And whereas, as Chancellor, Dr. Cibes was responsible for the implementation of all decisions and policies of the Board and for the satisfactory operation of all the institutions within that system. And whereas Dr. Cibes was a strong advocate for the use of technology in the classroom and oversaw the beginning of online courses offered by the Connecticut State University System. And whereas with his talent for leadership and passion for public service, Dr. Cibes will be deeply missed. And whereas on January 6, 2006, the Impact Connecticut State University Young Writers Trust will host the Thank You Bill, a celebration of words and the man, gala to commemorate the impact Dr. Cibes has had on Connecticut's youth. Now, therefore, I am Jody Rell, Governor of the State of Connecticut, in recognition of his dedicated service to the academic excellence of thousands of Connecticut's students, do hereby proclaim January 6, 2006 as Dr. William J. Cibes Jr. Day in the state of Connecticut. Congratulations, Dr. Cibes.
Notice the nice frame. It's from a frame come true in Torrington. Donated by Ethan and Jean Nadel. If you just give a wave. And they do all our frames. Thank you. Just a quick note to thank some of our sponsors who are here tonight. The penultimate community banker, Mark McAmber, when we were an unknown quantity, he wrote a big check for an ad saying, "Hey, Mom and Dad, have your kid enter this contest." And he's our very first sponsor. He's been with us. Mark. Now, real estate goes up and down, but Ginger and David Dean have always been with us. They're founding sponsors. Every year they write the check, and we're very happy for them to be here. David and Ginger. Also here tonight is attorney Stephanie Weaver, who's been an MC for some of our events and is a longtime sponsor. Stephanie. On with the program. Leading off and playing center field, the Connecticut Poet Laureate Marilyn Nelson. She teaches in the English department at the University of Connecticut. Her regular courses are creative writing, poetry genre course, Afro-American and American ethnic literature. In the spring 2000, she taught a course on poetry and meditation at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which was an interesting adventure. And she says here in a simple declarative sentence, "I write poems." Her books are on sale at Rainy Phase. I just bought one, a Wreath for Emmett Till, about the butchering of a young black man, I guess in the 50s. And Marilyn had a special formula for that, which is over my head, but some people have explained it. But it's a good book. And I'll ask you to sign it later. She has many other books. Most importantly to us, she's been a friend of the young writers. She's very busy, but she's been a keynote speaker for us. And she's been the Poet Laureate since 2002, succeeding Leo Cannellan. In 2004, she opened her home as a writer's colony, Soul Mountain Retreat. And I hear they not only take poets, they take prose writers there sometimes. And when she has time and energy, She makes quilts. Marilyn Nelson.
I'm pleased to be here to honor Bill Cibes. All of us who are writers were young writers, and most of us didn't have the kind of encouragement that young writers involved in this program have, and I congratulate you for being so supportive. I also have often, over the years, wanted to thank you for the way you helped Leo Cannellin during his laureateship and to bring poetry to students, college students, and high school students. I know that a lot of his activity was thanks to you, and I'm sure other people have thanked you, but I want to thank you also. Andy asked me to read a Wreath for Emmett Till. It's very heavy. And I hesitated to read it, but I follow orders. I'm a follower. Emmett Till was 14 years old when he was lynched 50 years ago, and my poem is a homage to him and a protest against the kind of hatred which led to this tragedy. I'm not sure. I don't think I'll give much more background. As Andy said, this is a formal poem. It's a very tight form. But instead of taking time to describe the form, I'll just read it because it's a long poem. It takes about 12 minutes to read.
Can you use the mic, Marilyn? You can't hear.
Which one? Should I use this one or this one? Ah, okay, got it. Yes, I can. All right. I will just read it. It's called A Wreath for Emmett Till. It's a sequence of 15 interlinked sonnets. There are repeating lines. And again, it takes about 12 or 15 minutes to read, so I'm going to read it rather quickly. Rosemary for Remembrance, Shakespeare wrote, a speech for poor Ophelia, who went mad when her love killed her father. Flowers had a language then. Rose petals in a note said, I love you. A sheaf of bearded oat said, your music enchants me. Goldenrod, be careful. Weeping willow twigs, I'm sad. What should my wreath for Emmett Till denote? First, heliotrope, for justice shall be done. Daisies and white lilacs, for innocence. Then mandrake, horror, wearing a white hood or barefaced, laughing. For grief, more than one, for one is not enough. Rue, yew, cypress, forget-me-nots, though if I could, I would. Forget him not, though if I could, I would forget much of that racial memory. No, I remember, like a haunted tree set off from other trees in the wildwood by one bare bough. If trees could speak, it could describe, in words beyond words, make us see the strange fruit that still ghosts its reverie, misty companion of its solitude. Dendrochronology could give its age in centuries by counting annual rings, seasons of drought and rain. But one night blood spilled at its roots, blighted its foliage. Pith outward it has been slowly dying, pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood. Pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood, my heartwood has been scarred for 50 years by what I heard with hundreds of green ears, that jackal laughter. 200 years I stood listening to small struggles to find food, to the songs of creature life which disappears and comes again, to the music of the spheres. 200 years of deaths I understood. Then slaughter axed one quiet summer night, shivering the deep silence of the stars. A running boy, 5 men in close pursuit, 1 dark, 5 pale faces in the moonlight. Noise, silence, backslaps, 1 match, 5 cigars. Emmett Till's name still catches in the throat. Emmett Till's name still catches in my throat, like syllables waylaid in a stutterer's mouth. A 14-year-old stutterer in the South to visit relatives and to be taught the family's ways. His mother had finally bought that White Sox cap. She'd made him swear an oath to be careful around white folks. She told him the truth of many a Mississippi anecdote. Some white folks have blind souls. In his suitcase, she'd packed dungarees, t-shirts, underwear, and comic books. She'd given him a note for the conductor, waved to his chubby face, wondered if he'd remember to brush his hair. Her only child, a body left to bloat. Your only child, a body thrown to bloat, mother of sorrows, of justice denied. Surely you must have thought of suicide, seeing his gray flesh, chains around his throat. Surely you didn't know you would devote the rest of your changed life to dignified public remembrance of how Emmett died, innocents slaughtered by the hands of hate. If sudden loving light proclaimed you blessed, would you bow your head in humility, your healed heart overflow with gratitude? Would you say yes like the mother of Christ? Or would you say no to your destiny, mother of a boy martyr, if you could? Mutilated boy martyr, if I could, I'd put you in a parallel universe, give you a better fate. There is none worse. I'd let you live through a happy boyhood, let your gifts bloom into a livelihood on a planet that didn't bear Cain's curse. I'd put you in a nice, safe universe, not like this one. A universe where you'd surpass your mother's dreams. But parallel realities may have terrorists too. Evil multiplies to infinitude, like mirrors facing each other in hell. You were a wormhole history passed through, transformed by the memory of your victimhood. Erase the memory of Emmett's victimhood. Let's write the obituary of a life lived well and wisely, mourned by a loving wife or partner, friends, and a vast multitude. Remember the high purpose he pursued. Remember how he earned a nation's grief. Remember accomplishments beyond belief, honors enough to make us slack-jawed, as if we looked up at a meteor shower or were children watching a fireworks display. Let America remember what he taught, or at least let him die in a World Trade Tower rescuing others, that unforgettable day, that memory of monsters, that bleak thought. The memory of monsters, that bleak thought, should be confined to a horror movie world, a horror classic in which a blind girl hears one by one the windows broken out and acts at the front door. In the onslaught of terror, as a hate-filled body hurls itself against her door, her senses swirl around one prayer: please, God, forget me not. The body snatchers jiggle the doorknob, werewolves and vampires slobber after blood. The circus of nightmares is here. She screams, he screams, neighbors with names he knows, a mob heartless and heedless, answering to no God, tears through the patchwork drapery of our dreams. Tears through the patchwork drapery of dream, for the hanging bodies, the men on flaming pyres, the crowd standing around like devil choirs, the children's eyes lit by the fire's gleams, filled with the delight of licking ice cream, men who hear hog screams as a man expires, watch fob good luck charms, teeth pulled out with pliers. Sinners, I can't believe Christ's death redeems. Your ash hair, Shulamith. Emmett, your eye. Machetes, piles of shoes, bulldozed mass graves, the broken towers, the air filled with last breaths, the blasphemies pronounced to justify the profane, obscene theft of human lives. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath. Not lilacs from the dooryard, but wildflowers I'd search for in the greening woods for hours of solitude, meditating on death. Let me wander through pathless woods beneath the choirs of small birds, trumpeting their powers at the intruder, trampling through their bowers, disturbing their peace. I cling to the faith that innocence lives on, that a blind soul can see again, that miracles do exist. In my house there is still something called grace, which melts ice shards of hate and makes hearts whole. I bear armloads of flowers home to twist into a circle, trillium Queen Anne's lace. Trillium apple blossoms, Queen Anne's lace, woven with oak twigs for sincerity. Thousands of oak trees around this country groaned with the weight of men slain for their race, their murderers acquitted in almost every case. One night 5 black men died on the same tree with toeless feet in this land of the free. This country we love has a Janus face. One mouth speaks with forked tongue, the other reads the Constitution. My country, 'tis of both thy nightmare history and thy grand dream. Thy centuries of good and evil deeds I sing, thy fruited plain, thy undergrowth of mandrake, which flowers white as moonbeams. Indian pipe, bloodroot, white as moonbeams their flowers. Picked, one blackens and one bleeds a thick red sap. Indian pipe, a weed that thrives on rot, is held in disesteem, though it does have its use in nature's scheme, unlike the rose. The bloodroot poppy needs no explanation here. Its red sap pleads the case for its inclusion in the theme of a wreath for the memory of Emmett Till. Though the white poppy means forgetfulness, who could forget when red sap on a wreath recalls the brown boy 5 white monsters killed? Forgetting would call for consciencelessness, like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death. Like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death, like the stars which fluttered their quicksilver wings, like the unbroken song creation sings while humankind tramples the grapes of wrath. Like wildflowers growing beside the path a boy was dragged along, blood spattering their white petals as he, abandoning all hope, gasped his agonizing last breath. Like a nation sending its children off to fight
our faceless enemy, immortal fear, the most feared enemy of the human race, like a plague of not knowing wrong from right, like the consciencelessness of the atmosphere, like a gouged eye watching boots kick a face. Like his gouged eye, which watched boots kick his face, we must bear witness to atrocity. But we are whole. We can speak what we see. People may disappear, leaving no trace, unless we stand before the populace, orators denouncing the slavery to fear. For the lynchers feared the lynchee, what he might do, being of another race, a great unknown. They feared because they saw their own inner shadows, their vicious dreams, the farthest horizons of their own thought, their jungles immune to the rule of law. We can speak now or bear unforgettable shame. Rosemary for remembrance, Shakespeare wrote. Rosemary for remembrance, Shakespeare wrote. If I could forget, believe me, I would. Pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood, Emmett Till's name still catches in my throat. Mamie's one child, a body thrown to bloat, mutilated boy martyr. If I could erase the memory of Emmett's victimhood, the memory of monsters, that bleak thought tears through the patchwork drapery of dreams. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath, trillium, apple blossoms, Queen Anne's lace, Indian pipe, bloodroot, white as moonbeams, like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death, like his gouged eye which watched boots kick his face. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'd like to introduce Rand Cooper. Rand Cooper is the author of two works of fiction, The Last to Go and Big as Life. His stories have appeared in Harper's, The Atlantic, Esquire, and many other magazines, on National Public Radio's Selected Shorts, and in Best American Short Stories 2003. The Last to Go was produced for television by ABC. Cooper is a contributing editor at Bon Appetit, where his prize-winning story has been his expense report. Rand is also a film columnist at Commonweal, frequent reviewer for New York Times Book Review. He writes for Northeast Magazine. Finally, he provides occasional non-comic relief, in his view, on the Bruce and Colin radio show on WTIC. Rand has been a judge for the Impact CSU competition for quite a few years. Of vital interest to Bill Cibes, Rand also selects the wine the judges drink at the annual Judges Luncheon, and this is subsidized most graciously out of Bill's personal pocket. Now, when I met President James Schmader at a literary event. I said, gee, I heard you were taking Bill's place at the annual Judges Luncheon, and I never saw a president run so fast. Now, Rand will introduce the young writers who will be speaking tonight.
It's a happy task for me to introduce four very talented, young, recent winners of our awards, but I do want to say a few words to and about Bill first. And I should say, a number of us are very concerned about the stewardship of the program in the future, and none more so than I, given that I am the person who orders the wine that Bill pays for. The only perk of being a judge for the Impact Youth Literary Awards is the annual lunch at the Hartford Club. And in those sumptuous surroundings, we engage a lengthy literary debate, fueled by the bottle of Chardonnay, the Merlot, that goes on Bill's tab. And since I do write part-time for culinary magazines, I am often called upon to select the wine. And that has worked out very favorably over the years. So I do want to say that I'm personally concerned that we may be meeting at Friendly's in the future. But I also do want to say that 3 years ago, that bottle of Domaine Raspail Gigondas 1998 red wine was all the way at the end of the wine list, was ordered by Diane Smith. I am very happy to be here on Bill Cibes Day. I have actually known Bill, strangely enough, curiously enough, for a long time. Curiously because it has nothing to do with this contest. I grew up in New London, and I remember a day, I would guess it was circa 1980. I was a college student at home at my mother's house, alone in the house. The doorbell rang. I answered it. And I would now say a young man. At the time, he seemed like an ancient man to me, which meant he was 33, was at the door, and he introduced himself as a candidate for a public office. It was Bill Cibes. He was at the time a professor at Connecticut College, and he was running for office for a state representative from New London, as was mentioned in the proclamation, elected subsequently multiple times. And here I was, a college kid, at home. And I'd taken political science classes, and I was eager to talk about whatever the issues of the day were. And as I recall, we ended up talking for 15 or 20 minutes. And I remember thinking at the time, and I asked him, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm going from door to door. I said, well, how many doors? He said, well, essentially everywhere. And I remember thinking, well, this guy is going to walk around all New London and knock on every door, every single door, and be available to talk with apparent enthusiasm, not to mention resourceful knowledge, for even 20 minutes with every college punk like me who's home from his poli-sci 101 class. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the math was very daunting when you added it all up. And for me, it became one of those benchmark moments when you understand something, some small thing you didn't understand before. And that was that this stuff that I'm sitting in class talking about and writing papers about in ultimately a pretty theoretical and abstruse way has a reality out there. And I remember thinking at the time, well, which one of my professors at my college is walking around from door to door in a town of 35,000 people, knocking on every door and talking about these things? Well, the answer was none, really. And so for me, this was a moment when politics moved out of the classroom and, as it were, onto the sidewalk, the literal sidewalk in front of our house. I've known Bill subsequently in other contexts, again by a curious twist of fate. In a brief incarnation as a high school English teacher, as a middle school English teacher, taught his daughter. And then again found myself living not more than half a mile from him and involved with him in this organization. And as I've come to know Bill less through personal involvement than by seeing how he has conducted himself over these decades, I've understood him to be a very unusual person. The world of the ivory tower, which really was the world that he started out in, with all of his impressive academic credentials, the PhD from Princeton, being a professor at Conn College, the world of the ivory tower wasn't enough. He wanted to take ideas out and try them out in the world. To come down from the ivory tower and become a public intellectual and a public servant is a rare combination of energies and accomplishments that make Bill a very exceptional as well as a useful and productive citizen of this state. And I think of him in that way, as an exemplary, all-purpose public intellectual and public servant. I'll add just one more thing. It strikes me increasingly, and I'm sure a number of you, many of you, have had this thought. As we go on in life, we tend almost inevitably to become defined and even narrowed by the horizons of our particular engagements and concerns. And it's difficult sometimes to credit value and understand and involve ourselves in things beyond the horizons of what our particular field is. I think of Bill as sort of the antidote to that whole pathology. Bill is a government specialist, a political scientist, and yet he has become involved in a very substantial way in the arts and in arts education in this state. And that reaching out from where he came from to other fields beyond his specific field is something that is a defining aspect of citizenship, and in my view, commendable, and I wish I could do it as well as he does. Just in closing, Bill, I know you have a lot of interests, and I'm not even getting into all of my stories about Bill's wife Peg and I were colleagues for 3 years teaching English, and there are a lot of faculty room stories, but maybe we'll get into that separately. Bill, I know you have a lot of interests that you now want to turn your enormous energies to, and I wish you the best of luck pounding the pavements of your new life. And thank you for all you've done. We have tonight a quartet of young writers, all women. The list of winners in our contest over the years has been heavily weighted toward young female writers, and one hopes to perhaps evolve an affirmative action program for young male writers. But that notwithstanding, I'm so glad to have 4 people to introduce tonight, whose stuff we've all read over the years and have admired very much. Our first reader tonight, I think they're all going to say something to us perhaps and read something as well. First up is Emily Dykes. Emily had 2 books written by the time she turned 18, and I think she is 18 now. Are you 18? One of them, this is self-described, 250-page Lord of the Rings ripoff. And she's working on her third, a psychological profile of the Star Trek character, Mr. Spock. That, in addition to a couple of 100 poems and plays as well. A play she wrote called Safety was performed at Montville High School with Emily directing, I understand. Is that right? That also was the prize-winning prose award for New London County this past year. The previous year, she won the statewide competition for a short story titled The King. In short, Emily is a one-person literary cottage industry. Please welcome her.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'm going to start tonight by reading a poem that I recently wrote called Anastasia. Oh, but wasn't he beautiful? Between the pages of her magazine, her words slip out like raindrops. She is lovely, in a wrinkled sort of way, in a silly sort of way, but still lovely.
Oh yes, he was beautiful. She met him on a liner in 1934, and the dancing swept her heart away, and the twirl of the skirts, and the swing of the band, and the terrible, wonderful feel of his hand. I always remember his hands. She told me once she could almost recall the day the Tsar and his family were killed. She would have been 2, and she said, "I always knew Anastasia was real." You understand these things, she said, if you're open enough to receive the truth. But she never believed in God. His hands were beautiful. She lost him 10 years later on a battlefield in France. The child born to them came 1 month too late and lived her life without father. And what a laugh he had. It could brighten the room. She explained to me how exciting it was when Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, and on the tour she even saw the young king's golden face. He looked a little like that. Half gypsy, she called him, her half-wild man, dark eyes and black hair with a devilish grin. He was only a man, bone, flesh, and skin, but to her he was solid gold. And yet, there were times when I hated him. She wants him to know that she never loved another. I tell her he can hear her, but she never believed in God. He is gone now. But wasn't he beautiful? We've only one photo, wrinkled, silly, faded, and brown. His face blurred just a little. But you can imagine how he was. So he was beautiful, like winter waterfalls and summertime fireworks, like snowflakes and dandelions, like wild black stallions and hardwood old trees. No, you never could imagine it. Then I must see it for myself. I always wondered if there'd ever been a man at all. She'd been alone so long, one woman. How could she have ever had a man? There was more God in him than man. But she never believed in God. She could not explain what she meant. She only let her meaning fall through the pages of her magazine. She only let me take from it whatever little scrap of truth I could find. You understand these things, she said, and if you do not yet, you will. I took that to mean that I was too young. I took that to mean that she thought me foolish. She took that to mean that one day the sun would rise. Oh, he'll take you away one of these days. I didn't ask who he was. She meant only that I would find love, that one day the sun would rise, and he would take my hand and we would dance our lives away. And he will be beautiful. And I will love him as much as I can. And when he dies, I will sit with an open magazine and tell my granddaughter, I always remember his hands. And she will wonder, why this devotion? How can she still love him, still miss him after so many years? And I will know what she thinks, but I will content myself by saying, I always knew Princess Diana was real. Thank you. And now I just want to say a few hundred words of thanks to Dr. Cibes. There was never any doubt in my mind that I would be a writer. I wrote my first book when I was 4 years old. No doubt most of you have heard of this prestigious novel, which I admit was loosely based on the work of Shel Silverstein. The novel, I called it The Missing Emily Meets the Big O. And though it received great reviews from critics like my mother, it never reached a wide audience. Nevertheless, I continued my work undaunted and came out with a comic book entitled Guy, being the unbelievably inane and boring adventures of a guy named Guy. This, too, failed in the market, perhaps because it was never put on sale. But I could go on listing all of my early attempts, but I fear you would find the anecdotes progressively less amusing. However, the fact remains that I did keep trying, again and again, and each time, to my mind, I failed. I became convinced that no one would ever, ever want to read anything I had to offer. And by the time I reached high school, I was thoroughly discouraged. I found myself looking upon a life wherein I struggled and failed repeatedly and ultimately starved to death in a gutter littered with pathetic poetry and appalling novels. But then everything changed, because in the frosty dawn of the year 2004, I entered a short story in the Impact Writing Contest. And long story short, I won. the state. And the next year, I won the region with a short play script that I'd written. And I realized that somehow there was a very slight chance that my life as a writer wouldn't end in a gutter or in debtor's prison. That maybe, just maybe, I could make a living at it. And that's why I'm here today. I want to thank one special man who made this wonderful program possible, made me able to compete in it. Dr. Cibes, you've done me a great service. And what is more, you have helped dozens of other hopeful young writers like myself over the years. And I know that you have done much in your life, but even if you had only done this one deed, I would still stand here overflowing with gratitude because you did what I thought no one could, and you gave me hope. And thank you, Dr. Cibes, for making my dream seem possible.
Jessica Roth of Granby is a student at the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, where she studies creative writing and visual art. She was a winner of the 2005 Young Writers Award for her poem, Growing Citrus. Jessica's expeditions in the world have led her to a number of countries, including Chile, which she considers a second home. She thinks of art as a vehicle to travel from one place to another, which is an excellent metaphor for art, really. Seeking answers, and more important, asking questions. We're very glad to have her tonight, Jessica Roth.
Thank you. Although I'm not a comic, I'm here to share some very sincere words with all of you and with Bill Cibes. Like everyone else here tonight, except maybe Bill himself, I'm here to recognize him. And we're not here only to thank him, but to honor him. And I would like to take a couple of minutes to do just that. Although I do not know Bill Cibes personally, I can say without a doubt that he is a man of dedication, vision, and compassion. I see Bill as a man who understands what it is to share, and as someone who has reached each of us, young writers, educators, supporters of the arts and of the community alike. Through his commitment to the Impact Program, Bill has given me the opportunity that brings me here tonight, inviting me to realize that a passion, a poem, a voice is not something that should be overlooked. Instead, it is something to be shared. I feel genuinely privileged to be a part of this evening as we take time to celebrate the contributions of Bill Cibes. In honor of this event, I would like to share with you the product of the passion that Bill and everyone involved with Impact work to recognize and encourage. The first poem I will read won last year's statewide competition. I wrote it following my mother's recovery from a very long illness, and I hope she'll forgive me for reading it. It's called Growing Citrus. 1. There is a tumor tucked beneath my mother's stomach, a lemon she keeps as a reminder that sweet indulgences turn sour and produce seeds, smooth but bitter. Sort of an organic inspiration, a neat and tidy saint inside her to keep things in order or disorder, turning long seasons into a single creeping October, leaves peeling themselves off of trees, one by one. 2. There is a lemon just outside of my mother's belly, kept warm by the friction of body movements, biological swaddling cloth, growing safe, where I imagine a figurative me might once have been. This lemon is an ambitious citrus, dream of being orange, grapefruit, dream of being Florida. Generations of tart women in my family have been warned, do not grow too big for your britches, peels. I worry about seam splitting and would not dare to let my mother catch me with sticky fingers and a soft, bruised tangerine behind my back. 3. A lime is self-contained, pulp wrapped in white pith, insulation borrowed from the sun and from a fibrous green earth. I remember thinking as a child, if only my skin were as dimpled, no one would dare sink their teeth in me looking for sugar. I'd like to finish with a poem that I wrote more recently. It reflects on my relationship with my father as we both prepare ourselves for the next big step in my life, going away to college. This poem is called You Forget I Was Born in July, just after the cicadas came to Georgia. I can see you, at the close of winter, eating breakfast alone, replacing the storm windows with screens that will not keep out the carpenter bees or the June bugs any better than April mildew. You will forget the single pane in my bedroom. I will let you. Leave it to draw dust behind my curtains in gray hills, year after year after year. Someday, when you are not home, I will come by to count the winged skeletons that have collected in your windows, put them in an envelope and mail them back to you after the first snow. I will not send the poem I wrote to ask if you remember how when I was little, I would not keep fireflies in glass jars. I would let them climb bare arms and shoulders all the way to my nose, laugh, send them into the sky, wings like dust. Thank you, everyone, and thank you especially, Bill Cibes.
After Charlotte, we'll take a dessert break.
Okay. All right. I want to introduce Charlotte Crow, and Andy just informed me that after Charlotte reads, we'll be taking a dessert break, and then we'll pick up from there. Charlotte Crow is a junior at Canton High School, and she won last year's Impact Young Writers Award for prose for her story Korean Laundry, which I recall very well, having been one of the prose judges. It was a lovely and very smart rendering of a young soldier's experience in the Korean War. And I believe it was based on recollections of a relative of hers, her grandfather perhaps, or uncle. And what I recall about this story, just to indulge me for a moment, it was about 3 pages long. A hallmark of the particularly unusually talented young writer is the ability to do, in a very compressed form, a lot with narrative. And some writers can accomplish in 3 pages what other writers think they need 30 pages to do. And in fact, the challenge of compression remains a challenge for writers well on down the line, as I know from having written many monstrous 45-page drafts of stories that really needed to be 14 pages. So to see someone who has that from the start is an exciting thing for a fiction writer and certainly for a fiction judge. Charlotte also attended the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts. As a Hartford resident, I'm very gratified to see the prominence of the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts in these awards. As a creative writing major in her freshman and sophomore year, both Jessica and Charlotte have been students of Raphael Ozas there, and she plans to return as a senior. She has a passion for a number of art forms. Writing is one of them. And she is very grateful to all those, including Bill Cibes, who recognize the importance of creative education in the arts. Charlotte.
Good evening. I just got my contacts yesterday and I'm so impressed I can see all of you. As you know, I am a junior in high school, and my high school years thus far have been ones, I believe, I hope my beliefs are accurate, of dramatic growth. And I've not only become more comfortable in these long limbs and lost my braces, but have begun to more acutely observe my surroundings and record my findings in ever-evolving prose, poetry, and personal essays. Many factors have contributed to this growth of mine. I attended the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, as Rand Cooper said, my freshman and sophomore year, and I believe that the support and encouragement of a creative community had a profound impact. I was shocked as a freshman to discover that what I believed was merely a quirky and inconsequential hobby was, in fact, art. And people were interested in what I had to say. Youth usually doubts that its voice has any worth. Insecurity comes with the awkward limbs and the braces. And it's so important that places like the Academy and people like Bill Cibes, who endorse creative education, exist to quell youth's fears, to let us know that our voices are being not only heard, but appreciated. As the weather grew warmer last spring, I was becoming increasingly frustrated with my writing. My poems were trying to be deep and failing, and my fiction was either ending too soon or there was just no end in sight. And I began to seriously doubt my abilities and the point of the whole process, constantly throwing up my hands and saying things like, who would ever want to read this, or no one cares. But I was wrong, because in June, Bill Cibes, Andy Tebow, and the Impact CSU Young Writers Trust awarded me not only with a generous check, but with validation. People bothered to read what I had written and went so far as to like it. Individuals like Mr. Cibes, who value creative thought and writing, are such a relief. During an age in which education comes from the analytical perspective and doesn't really understand or nurture the creative. As a high school student, I am usually reduced to a grade point average or a test score, and I cannot fully express how refreshing it is to have what I consider my real work valued, how honored and grateful I am that Bill Cibes and others like him take me seriously as an artist. Thank you. And I would like to read for you the prose piece, Korean Laundry, which won the award this spring. This story is for my grandfather, who was a Marine during the Korean War. It's warm, almost stifling, and it's only early morning. The sun is just rising, and we're preparing for the day. I close my eyes and allow myself 30 more seconds to wish for more sleep, to think fleetingly of home. Home. My body aches. Quickly, I push self-pity away. We haven't endured much fighting. We have a pretty stable camp set up. We're staying in barracks surrounded by a fence. We're more or less safe. I splash water on my face. My stomach's moaning for breakfast. I pull a shirt from the pile of clean laundry beside me. It smells distinctly of river. We have few clothes. I bring my soiled underwear and fatigues down to the fence. The women from the local village greet us there in the morning. They collect our dirty clothes and deliver the ones they've washed for us, folded into neat bundles. You can see them by the river, bending, white cloth fanning out in the water around them. They scrub and beat and lay our clothes out to dry. I take a deep breath and step out into the sun. It's bright already, the troops awake, and the men are already walking down to the fence. I can see my woman, the woman who always washes my clothes. She's hard to miss. She's large with child. She's bigger by the day, her belly swelling out, out, out. She kneels in the muddy water, scrubs methodically at the shirt resting on her bulging belly. She has the most beautiful hair. It's fine and dark, knotted at the back of her neck. She waits by the fence with my laundry, a miraculous white, folded neatly. She smiles weakly as I approach, hands me the bundle through the fence, pushes it between the slats, and I push my dirty laundry towards her. Now the space, the moment of silence before I turn and hurry back to breakfast. It's an uncomfortable gap between us, this woman who washes my sweat and blood into the river every day, and me. She wouldn't understand my thank you. So I nod and push the guilt I feel deeper. She looks so tired, so burdened. I smile and turn back towards the men. Earth crumbles as I ascend. I press my hands against my spine and wonder what it would feel like to carry a child folded inside me. The breakfast bell sounds and her image is gone. She's forgotten until tomorrow. The sky is gray. The horizon smolders with the sunrise about to happen. The other men are barely stirring. I won't find sleep again. My eyes ache. My skin is heavy. I smell of sweat. Quickly, I roll out and let my clothes slip off my lean body and onto the dirt floor. I take the clean laundry, the clean Korean laundry that smells like river, and I dress myself. I can picture my shirt, my trousers pressed up against her stomach, her pink flesh showing through the white cotton now resting on my shoulders. I want today's new laundry. I want this day to begin. The gray sky is weighing me. The war is weighing me down. The other men have begun to wake, and I step outside. Some have even started towards the fence. I follow with my few soiled garments. I look for her, squint against the rising sun. I see no round woman, no bulging woman. I blink. Where is she? I near the fence, my neck twisting for a glimpse of her. Then I see an arm coming through the slats, a perfect bundle of bleached white in my direction. I take a few steps. There she is, her hair shining and eyes dark. They remind me of wet stones. But she's not the same. There's no swelling, no bulge. She's flat, slim, a river reed gesturing to me with cotton folds. I'm breathless. Baby? My hands form a belly with round hand motions. Baby? I rock an imaginary newborn in my arms, cradling back and forth, back and forth. She smiles, nods. Baby, she repeats, rocking her own invisible baby. I take my laundry from her hands. It's spotless, flat, and neatly folded. I wonder how this woman gave new life and still managed to clean my muddy pants. I try not to think about all the blood that she washed out of her sheets, washed beside my laundry into the river. I don't give her my dirty clothes. A day off from one man's laundry is the largest gift I have to give. Thank you so much.
We can all mosey on back to our places. We're going to pick up where we left off. We have one more reader among our quartet of award winners. And our final reader is recent Smith College graduate, Candy Deschamps. And Candy has been a frequent and generous returnee to these functions of ours. She won the 2001 Impact Award for her short story, very memorable to me. Her short story entitled Confessions of a David Cassidy Clone. Obviously in an absurdist genre. This story occasioned one of the most lengthy and fruitful discussions at the Hartford Club that the prose judges ever had. And I believe it was at that discussion that the aforementioned bottle of wine bill was ordered. But more recently, Candy has won an Elizabeth Drew Memorial Prize at Smith College. Is that correct? Yes, it is. For the best honors thesis in English, she wrote a thesis on Vladimir Nabokov's novel Pale Fire, a daunting and magical work of early postmodernism. But even more exciting, for me and other writers at any rate, I understand that Candy is currently working at the Hudson Review in New York City, where I and other writers associated with this award will soon be plaguing her with submissions, because it's a great place to publish fiction, and we will be working on sending our stuff out to you very soon. Candy Deschamps.
Well, okay. This is not my first time here at the podium, but it is my first time being able to thank Mr. Cibes the way I maybe should have a long time ago when I was just a girl and didn't know really how far this would take me. But before I do, I thought that I would open with well, this was published in the Hudson Review in autumn 1989. About a young writer who had just published his first book, and one of our reviewers writes, and I think you're going to see that this is almost too stellar a review to really believe, but the casual expertness of procedure in the passage just quoted, its unassuming way of making the point about how yard care changed from picnic to work makes Updike sound, by contrast, positively Baroque. And that was written about the first book of a young Rand Cooper. So I found that today when I should have maybe been doing Hudson Review office work, but instead I found some of that. So that's what I do in my job that has followed in the literary vein. Anyway, I would like to thank you, Bill Cibes, and I want you to know what, in my mind, I'm thanking you for exactly. So, a few words. It's not that, in my opinion, the Impact CSU Awards fills a void, and by that I mean it's not a literacy campaign. It's not an initiative established in the absence of something, to make something, to fix a problem. And what I mean by that is, if kids don't read enough today, most kids, or write enough, bookworms like us might lament that, but there's not really anything you could do. My 14-year-old brother, he has an aesthetic in his own right. He won't let you think otherwise, but you're not going to tear him away from, a Clint Eastwood Western for long enough to read Louis L'Amour. But rather, for those of us high school kids carrying around within us maybe a bud of something, those of us for whom the written word still held a special magic for whatever reason, the program, in the way it's set up, finds it and makes something that could be into something that is, and has been anyway for me for the past 5 years. So the judges in this case are not teachers looking for the best behaved students or the ideal graduation speech or what a 17-year-old kid learned on his European vacation. It's they're writers and readers looking for the individuals in the new generation who are going to join their ranks. So it's for that reason that it's a great honor to be selected. The reward, which is very generous, and I think we should mention, that's endowed to the project, provides the young writer not only with opportunity and confidence, but a little bit of glamour, and really more than that, each writer, and certainly me, gets a golden key. What did I write here? Gets a golden key into a thriving network of literary, impassioned people whose only commitment, or whose only maybe common overriding interest may be the relentless pursuit and support of fresh voices, which I think is really special. Anyway. I'm just going to read a very small passage from my winning prose entry of 2001, which now seems to me very old, but I guess 5 years is a drop in the bucket, I hope, in a long and healthy life. Anyway, and people, friends still, I don't know what they do at their jobs, but they still Google me and come up with this all the time. They're like, tragedy of a David Cassidy clone, Candy? And I'm like, okay, I gotcha. So just a couple paragraphs here. The opening. Across the table, my David Cassidy clone lover has been tapping his spoon against an egg for 5 minutes. Soft, insistent, tap, tap, tap. He has one of those strange porcelain egg cups that keep the egg upright for the eater, very small and posh, and very out of place in his apartment, which has dirty fingerprints on the walls. I wonder where he got it. I wonder how the walls also have dirty footprints on them. Tap, tap, tap. Please stop that, Thaddeus. He looks at me very pointedly with his blue Partridge Family eyes and delivers a final tap that cracks the egg right open. Raw, it moves very slowly over the porcelain. Very slow and devastating, an eggshell avalanche. The narrator goes on. What happens in this story is Thaddeus, who's kind of a klutz. I guess it's kind of, a copy never comes out as fresh, I guess, as the original. But anyway, he's kind of a klutz, and he breaks a dinosaur in the Museum of Natural History. And so he's indebted. He works there as kind of an indebted slave. And because he owes them, I think I quoted the dinosaur's worth at $2.1 million. So he works there, and he meets the narrator of this story, who likes to hang out in the museum after dark because it's so creepy that I guess she likes it. And so David Cassidy is coming to town because he still does music, it turns out, or at least still did in 2001 when I wrote this. And Thaddeus tells the narrator that he's going to go and he's going to meet David Cassidy and say, I'm your love child. Look at me. You owe me something. Can you give me $2.1 million? Because, this dinosaur problem I have. But Cassidy says no. And this is the very end of the story with what happens with that. Later, Thaddeus called us from some swank hotel that David Cassidy set him up in. He was not appeased. Cassidy's a jerk, he told us. He says that any son of his would do whatever it takes to pay for the dinosaur, and that the best he could do was make me comfortable for one night. What a cop-out. I was supposed to say, that's really too bad, Thaddeus, that your David Cassidy's son scheme didn't work out. I thought you had that $2.3 million in the bag. Instead, I told him I'd meet him in the hotel. He was eating M&Ms and smoking Marlboros, savoring the 400% profit taste of the minibar. I watched the way his vices brought him in touch with his humanity. I listened to him criticize David Cassidy with an exaggerated sense of detachment. I even cut his hair for him, choppy and cheap the way he likes it, so that any remnants of feathery light locks were left for the maid to clean out of the sink. I would assure him that when he got older, his boyish features wouldn't look as strange on him as they did on David Cassidy now. I would assure him that the dinosaur thing was not nature's way of saying, you are not a part of what we've worked 4 billion years for. I would assure him that he was not David Cassidy, that Thaddeus Williams would help out a kid with a dinosaur problem if he could. The next morning, my David Cassidy clone lover is tapping eggs, untouched by the magic spark of the chromosome, and I wonder if, somehow, he's waiting for them to hatch. Thank you. I just wanted to say one thing about this as a point of possible interest, because it's kind of funny, at least funny to me, especially in retrospect. I submitted this to my high school literary magazine, and it got rejected for supposed homosexual subtext. I mean, I might take issue with that even if I had planned homosexual subtext, but I kind of like, in a way, that it got out of hand in wacky ways that I couldn't even have predicted or planned. Although I didn't understand that you can't say shacked up. Like, two guys don't shack up. You know, I just didn't have a handle on the vernacular. So it's kind of my own fault, I guess. But thank you, and thank you again. And I'm going to step down now, but thank you.
Thank you, Candy, and Charlotte, Jessica, and Emily, for all you gave us tonight. I'm glad you mentioned that, Candy, about your work being censored by your high school. We've also had, besides Danbury High School, we had Rockville High School to the list of schools that had censored students' work that have won prizes from us. I have a brief statement from Impact Chairman Jim Irwin, who couldn't be here tonight. He's out trying to make money in Asia so we can give more money to young writers. At this moment, as we sit here in comfort and security, hundreds of writers around the world suffer in prison for what we reward and encourage young writers to do. We live in an era in which there are numerous attempts by governments to silence the critical writer in the exercise of free speech in literature. The Young Writers Program, with its list of distinguished young writers and titles, is testimony to the failure of those attempts. So, thank Jim Irwin for his words and his money. If I could just recognize a few people here. Longtime friend of the Young Writers Program, academic vice president at Eastern Connecticut State University, Demetrius Pakis. Also the new presidents of Central, Jack Miller. And Southern, Cheryl Norton. Our next speaker is a guy who wrote the greatest poem ever written about Ted Williams. I don't think I'll read it tonight. His name is Franz Dusky. Poet Franz Dusky has been published in more than 150 journals and anthologies, including The New Yorker, The Nation, Rolling Stone, Yankee Magazine, and the Baseball Diamonds. He has read his work in dozens of venues, including Yale, Harvard, University of Arizona, the New School for Social Research, and the Donnell Library. He has taught creative writing at Yale and Gateway Community College. A featured poet at New Haven's Festival of Arts and Ideas, Dusky's books include Rowing Across the Dark, University of Georgia Press, which Rainey May might have a copy of. He's a founding board member of the Impact CSU Young Writers Trust and has served as a judge every year of the competition. Franz Dusky.
Thank you, Andy. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. How about now? Because you won't miss anything, this was handed me, Diane Smith. Can't make out her writing. It says, Bill Cibes has changed his mind, it says. So I guess you're staying there. What the hell? So there's no sense. Bill Cibes and I go back a few years. And I really admire him, respect him, love him. Incredible human being. For a lot of reasons, not only what he does with Impact and tying in the university system to the awards, but it goes back to a mutual friend of ours, and that goes back a long time with Vivian Shipley, and that was Leo Cannellin, who was a hard-working poet, struggling, doing battle. And through Vivian, got him involved in various schools, and it was Bill Cibes who really helped Leo secure his life in his latter years. And of course, Leo was tremendous by bringing his wisdom to various high schools around the state. And I don't know if there are any members of the Board of Trustees of the State University system here. Are there? Because it's my belief that they'll probably have to rewrite the job description because they're never going to find another Bill Cibes or anyone close. Is that my 10 minutes yet? Probably not. Well, I'll read a few things. There used to be a woman who did photography here. Anybody remember her at all? Her name was India Blue. This is called The Death of India Blue. And I thought I'd read it for those people who knew her and just to remember her on this evening too. Alone on a Sunday afternoon, heading north, she crashes into trees on I-91. Was she changing a CD, smoking too much? Leaves 2 sons behind. When I held India in my arms, which was all too infrequent, I could feel life in her body, lightning like energy passing through her, because she had made that huge leap, left her husband, and made a life photographing punk bands and poets, the outsiders with all the passion that her family couldn't understand. So why try to explain? At the funeral she didn't want, the priest tried to convince us that God makes allowances for people who live outside confessionals and conventions. Even her ex-husband couldn't understand, so he called me. We began to talk about India, about his sons hating him. Then he got another call on call waiting and said he'd call me right back. He did. I listened to his voice on the answering machine. I mean, if you're going to turn me off to call, wait, the hell with you. I mean, how much time do you think I got in my life? This is called Is There Life After Birth? Have you ever considered that, the possibilities? She comes up to me at a party waving her new book, now ranked 26,347th on Amazon.com. And rank is the right word. She wants to know how I am doing and how come I don't publish more. Well, she is standing in front of me, all tentacles and spidery arms, so I can't get by or around her. She is effusive, praising me with faint dams. Being here reminds me of how right I am not to come to parties, that writing is discouraging enough without being surrounded by successes. This is a poem called I Wish I Was My Wife So I Could Be Married to Me. I thought we'd be in the mood for poetry. Okay, well, I think the title is probably better than the poem. But it's exactly how I do feel. This is the poem Andy likes a lot. It's called The Splendid Splinter. And the reason why I'm going to read it tonight, because Ted Williams was a pretty great man. I think Bill Cibes is a unique, powerful, great individual, too. You won't find people like Bill Cibes often in life, or if ever again. So here's something for Ted Williams. Forget that he lost 5 years and 2 hitches as a Marine pilot. Forget that his eyes were so good that no optic equipment could measure them. Forget that he never tipped his hat as a player and once after a home run spat at reporters in the press box. Forget that he hated crowds and neckties, and that if they had a major league for fishermen, he'd be a great hitter in that too. Forget that his plane was shot down over Korea and that he was flying the next day at age 35. Worn out dogfighting MiGs when he should have been playing left field in Fenway Park. Forget that in 1941 he hit .406 and wasn't named Most Valuable Player. And in 1942 he won the Triple Crown and still no MVP award. Forget that when he made an error or he struck out, he had that inner rage because he needed to be the best. Teddy Ballgame, the kid, the thumper, the lost son from San Diego, who needed to be the greatest hitter ever. Forget that no one ever hit for a higher average with more home runs. If you remember anything, remember he played in 4 decades. He could count the stitches on a baseball as it spun toward him at 90 miles an hour. He won 6 batting titles and would have won 2 more if pitchers didn't walk him and taking away the needed at-bats. Remember that he came back from wars with broken bones that changed his swing. Remember that teams shifted infields to the right side of the diamond to try to stop him, but how do you stop a home run? If you remember anything, remember the power, the grace, and most of all, the inner will. The blessing and the curse of being the last 400 hitter, the last man to win a Triple Crown twice, the last of his breed, still out there alone in the blue Florida Gulf, weakened eyes watching for a strike, waiting for another hit. Next time someone asks you who was the greatest hitter, well, think of Ty Cobb for average. Think about the Babe or Hammer and Hank for distance. When they ask who combined batting average with power, think about Ted Williams over Korea, fuselage on fire out there flying home. Think about 5 seasons lost to wars when he was in his prime. No one else gave that. And as the dust settles on the 20th century and we move into the 21st, and the wars to end all wars have been ended, when they ask who was the last man to hit 400, the last man to give his fire on the field and in the skies, true grit under pressure, remember. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Franz. A couple more people to recognize. I don't know if President Schmatter is still here, but yeah, okay. Well, he can watch it on CTN. I had a special recognition for you. We're not going to put the bite on you to pick up the tab that Bill does. We know that Dr. David Carter is his able successor, and we have an appointment to do that, Rand, so don't worry. I'd also like to recognize State Rep. Demetrius Gennaros from Farmington. Thanks for coming today. We told Bill that he had the right to remain silent, but he'll be saying a few words after Wally Lamb, so stick around for that. Our next speaker is Vivian Shipley, a dear friend of many of us and a friend of the Young Writers. She's been a judge and a speaker, and I'm happy to announce that She'll be our keynote speaker at this June's annual dinner. Vivian is a Connecticut State University Distinguished Professor. That's a big deal in academia. I think you have to kill 10 people and, be a great poet and a great teacher. And she's done all of those things. Vivian is a longtime editor of Connecticut Review. She teaches at Southern Connecticut State University. She's the author of at least 12 books of poetry, and I think Rainey Faye has a few. She's the recipient of numerous honors and awards, including the Lucille Medwick Prize from the Poetry Society of America, the Hart Crane Poetry Prize, the Robert Frost Foundation Poetry Prize, and the Anne Stanford Poetry Prize. I'd just like to tell you what one of Vivian's students said about her, which gives you an idea of what an advocate she is. It has been my pleasure for the past 3 years to work with Dr. Shipley. Before working with Dr. Shipley as both a professional and student, I was unpublished. Through her careful mentoring, I have since had the honor of being published in Louisiana Literature. Caduceus, is that how you say that? That's a big publication, right? Almost as big as Connecticut Review. Folio and Voices Along the River. I have also won the Leslie Leeds Poetry Prize, 5 Cummings Prizes for Fiction, and the Southern Connecticut State University Graduate Student Poetry Prize. My poem, Sharecropper's Yield, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Dr. Shipley has made major contributions to Connecticut's literary community, and she was recently honored by the Connecticut Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress, for her lifetime achievement. Vivian Shipley.
Thank you, Andy. I barely know myself up here. I'd like to say that I had the distinct honor and privilege of following Wally Lamb, and tonight I'm preceding him as the winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award. I said that I was like my pound dog. If you stick around, keep your mouth open long enough, something good's going to drop in it. Now, Wally brought Virginia Woolf to be with us tonight, and also she would like to thank Bill Cibes for giving all of us in this room who write, who try to achieve, a room of our own. So thank you, Bill, from Virginia. Thank you, Wally, for bringing her along. I'd also like to take this opportunity, before I begin to speak, to recognize Pitt Pinegar. Pitt is in the back, and Pitt is not only a superb poet, but she has also been very, very involved in mentoring much of the talent that you have heard tonight from our young writers, our young students. She has been an exemplary teacher, devoting her life to helping others. Now, fortunately, we had a break for desserts, because after I heard that Bill Cibes picks up the tab for wine, I went and rewrote my entire remarks. So you're going to find that they're very positive. I was going to tell the truth about Bill Cibes that nobody would dare get up here and say, because I am a CSU professor after all, and a poet who has an obligation to tell the truth. But I'm also a poet who loves wine. So you will find that these will be unremittingly positive. Bill may be retiring, but he's going to continue working for CSU each day, and he'll be working through the hands of writers who will be writing poems and stories because of the support, the encouragement that he's given all of us. I'd like to tell you a few of the things that he did that you might not know about, because Bill has never been one to talk about the good individual deeds that he does for people. Some of them you've heard a bit about, but I would like to underscore them again. Leo Connellan, who was our second poet laureate of Connecticut, died suddenly of a stroke almost 5 years ago. He was able to help other poets find their work in his final years because Bill appointed him as CSU Poet in Residence. Without this position, Leo would have had no way to support himself and his family or to continue writing his poetry. As Poet in Residence, Leo visited numerous high schools, helping students, also mentored many CSU students. One of these, John Rose, my student at Southern, just contacted me to let me know he's now a professor of creative writing at Landmark College in Vermont. John stressed how important Leo had been in his life and that it was the encouragement from Leo that made him decide to become a teacher so that he could pass this flame along that Leo ignited because of Bill's support to other writers. And hopefully they too will pass that flame along. And one day we'll see in our world a host of candles, a host of light. I'd like to read you a poem I wrote about Leo to let you know something about his life, and then a poem by Leo, which is as relevant today as when it was written, to show you the type of creative work that Bill Cibes has helped to foster. We'll find it. Coma, Bacchus Hospital, Norwich, Connecticut. For Leo Connellan, 1928-2001. I key in Connellan on a robot's pad that leads me to your room in intensive care. You are stiller, older, and quiet. A phone is not squeezed into your shoulder. Your daughter puts a hearing aid in your good ear in spite of the face a nurse makes. My hands rusty, I pray for words to wing into gulls, so you, Poet Laureate of Connecticut, can laugh with me about the bag of urine with the brand name Bard hooked on your bed. A doctor says touch and hearing are the last senses to go. I tunnel a finger, my love, into your hand. The off-season rates at Maine motels with room service was the makeshift paradise you gave to your wife. If love of this earth is a way to enter heaven, you will be there, trying to tear a hole back into this world for fried oysters, onion rings, lobster dripping in butter. The grandson of an Irish immigrant who fled to Rockland, Maine, you were 7 when your mother died, saying she'd gone to take care of another boy who needed her more. Your father took you and your brother to her grave each year, figuring you'd figure it out. Death will end your childhood dream, your mother never in it. She will be at the kitchen door waiting, hands holding muffins studded in blueberries with names like Rabbit Eyes and Tiff Blue. Leo, go to her now. Now I'd like to read a poem by Leo that I think is as relevant today as when it was written. I'd also like to take this opportunity of saying how proud I was to have Leo represent me as a poet, as our Poet Laureate of Connecticut, and how proud I am today to have Marilyn Nelson representing us as our Poet Laureate of Connecticut. I think in Marilyn's poem you hear why we need poets to remind us what it is to be human. And I think you will hear this in this very short poem by Leo called To War Dead. Boys who walk through coffin blossoms, I do not know why you die, leaving our young women like penguins with great open flippers, because you have never slipped forever out of their arms. Leaves of you, young flowers fall like shook horse chestnut trees. You drop at my feet like field mice caught in meadow fire. Boys, your cries screech my dreams. We advance to live on the moon, slaughtering our world behind us, leaving no trace that we were ever brothers. Tomorrow, the Connecticut National Guard troops, 1st Battalion of the 102nd Infantry, will leave Connecticut. They will go for a full year of duty in Afghanistan. 17 of those young people are from Southern. So tonight, I would like for all of us to remember Leo's poem, to wish them Godspeed and keep them in our prayers. To honor Leo's memory, as senior editor of Connecticut Review, I established a poetry prize to be given each year to a CSU student that's selected in a 4-campus competition. I'd like to read one of the prize-winning poems by Southern's Greg Antonini that is a permanent memory in permanent honor of Leo Connellan. This is called A New Dawn on Beach Street. Water boils in a pan for chamomile. No teapot eases my morning. It's buried inside boxes I sealed only yesterday. Through the picture window, Long Island Sound is choppy, more black than blue, hitting the rocks with a white that foams into firecracker snakes on Independence Day. Water boils, but there is no whistling to battle the sound of breaking waves. Chamomile has no chance against the ocean. Passing cars woke me this morning, but the bare horn of the gull lulled me back to sleep, introducing my new mornings with soft light and song. Today's jobs are simple: buy an alarm clock, bowls for sugar and flour, and enough photo albums to decipher the last 15 years. Misjudging the curves of the pan, I spill when I pour, wishing I'd labeled all the boxes. I walk to the window, hot tea in hand. Waves recede, snap back over sand. The sky is clear and massive, draped along the biggest horizon I have ever seen. Outside it is below freezing, but inside the sun bathes my new home with a light that's carried in by the song of crying gulls. Without Bill's unwavering support, student poets like Greg Antonini would not have received the recognition that publication in Connecticut Review gave them. What's more important, if we've heard this tonight, is the confidence that prizes and publication give to our students. Greg was also chosen as a Connecticut student poet. Marilyn Nelson was one of the judges. And he gave readings at universities like Trinity and Wesleyan, as well as the CSU campuses. When he read at Yale University, his parents came. After the reading, Greg's father, who had spent his entire life mixing concrete, told me how he had been on the crew which worked on the Yale building where Greg read. He was so proud to have his son reading his poetry there. To paraphrase Southern's President Cheryl Norton, Bill has helped make CSU not only a university of opportunity, but also one of choice. Because of Bill Cibes, when I took over the editorship of Connecticut Review in 1996, I was able to change it from a journal that published mainly in-house work to the major national journal that you see here tonight. In addition to authors like Dana Gioia, who heads the NEA, Maxine Kumin, Pulitzer Prize winner, Ted Kuser, who's Poet Laureate of the United States, Connecticut Review has continued to publish many Connecticut writers and many writers from CSU. And so it gives a national audience an awareness of the CSU system, commitment to excellence, and also the impact of creative work on our society. Without Bill, this would not have happened. This is what Connecticut Review looked like when I became the editor in 1996. And I think you will see it contained excellent work, which it still does, but there has been a major innovation, and this has been only through the confidence, continued enthusiasm that Bill showed to our board. To conclude, I have, I think, an exciting conclusion for you. John Briggs can't be here tonight because he's reading at Western. but if you were, I'd ask him to come up here and help me celebrate. We would like to announce tonight that the Connecticut Review Board has established a new literary prize for CSU students to permanently honor Bill Cibes and to recognize the significant and lasting contribution he has made to Connecticut Review and our Connecticut State University creative writing students. It will be called the William Cibes Prize for Fiction and will be published in the spring 2006 issue as a permanent monument, as a permanent honor to Bill Cibes. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Vivian. I'd like to recognize a couple more people. We have this prototype program for French and Spanish. It's supported by the Litchfield Morris Rotary, and a longtime friend of the young writers from the Rotary is Bob Doyle. Thanks for coming, Bob. Also, two people who have worked very hard to keep this program alive. Litchfield High teachers, Carol Kearns and Mary Pereira. Almost finally in the recognition department, two professors who are also very dynamic and great writers who have been keynote speakers for us. Professor Audrey Kerr from Southern. And Professor Ravi, I don't play the sitar, Shankar of Central. Our final speaker before Bill gives closing remarks is Wally Lamb, the beloved author of She's Come Undone, and I know this much is true. Both books were Oprah's book club selections and #1 New York Times bestsellers. Wally is also the volunteer facilitator of a writing workshop at what I call the Niantic Jail. They call it the York Correctional Institution, but that's a phony name, which dishonors the Warden York, who was a reformer and a good person. Wally's writers in the workshop published this book, which is one of my favorites. I keep on buying it and giving it away. I'm not giving this one away because it was signed by one of the writers in Wally's group who's here tonight. And this person won the Penn Newman's Award for Freedom of Speech. And the response by the Connecticut Department of Correction was to shut down the writers program. And someone who lived through this maze of oppression, deception, and other things I really can't say for family publication, is here with us tonight, and I'm honored, as we all are, by her presence, Barbara Parsons. It's all yours, Wally.
Well, there will be a 5-minute break first so we can all get our jammies on. Bill, I knew from the time that I was 8 that I wanted to be a teacher, but not that I wanted to be a writer. In 3rd grade, my lowest marks were in reading. Walter needs to check out more library books. And in writing, Walter needs to practice his penmanship and be less sloppy. If you would have suggested to my teacher, prim Miss Comstock, that I would grow up to be a novelist, she might have thrown open her mouth and guffawed. My 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Kramer, took us outside to write about nature, and she made us memorize her favorite poems. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's Evangeline, Joyce Kilmer's Trees, Vachel Lindsay's The Potatoes Dance. At a school-wide assembly, our class was made to mount the stage and recite the Potatoes Dance in unison. I was mortified because Mrs. Kramer had tapped me for a solo quatrain that required me to step forward from my peers and speak the following lines, which at age 55 I still remember verbatim, possibly because of post-traumatic stress syndrome. There was just one sweet potato. He was golden brown and slim. I was a fat 8th grader, and I had to recite this. The ladies loved his dancing. People in back of me, the ladies loved his dancing. The ladies loved his dancing. They danced all night with him. Well, at the back of the auditorium, the science teachers were snickering during the recitation. I forgave them immediately. To be honest, I thought literature was kind of stupid. Later that same school year, President Kennedy was killed, and then the Beatles arrived from across the pond, and then it was graduation day. I was only half paying attention when I heard Miss Higgins at the microphone call my name. I got off my folding chair and took the perp walk to the front of the auditorium. Miss Higgins shook my hand, and she gave me an envelope. On the outside it said, "The Julia Pease Award for Writing." Inside, there was a $10 bill. A writing award? For me? Mrs. Kramer's smile implied that there had not been a mistake. But later that day, I took my prize money to Ocean Beach Park, and I spent it on skee ball and the tilt-a-whirl just in case the teachers came to their senses and wanted it back. Bill, I tell you this story because, like my teacher, Mrs. Kramer, you have gone out of your way to support the young writers of this state. And you just never know the ripple effect that that might have and the validation that causes a chain reaction. And so I'm happy to be here tonight to wish you well in this next writing phase of your life and to say thank you so much for your long-standing support and your unswerving dedication to the Impact Young Writers Awards. Now, I want to say a word or two about another stalwart supporter of writers, young and old, and that is Andy Tebow. Andy, of course, is a tough guy who balks at sentiment, and he's also a self-effacing son of a gun who gets a little antsy if you say anything nice about him. But you'll have to forgive me back there, Andy, because after all, I do have the microphone, and I can't help myself. I want to take this opportunity to salute you and your tireless efforts in support of young people on several fronts. Not just writers, but also athletes and musicians, kids whom you have worked for on all cylinders. And likewise, I admire you for fighting the good fight over the long haul on behalf of those to whom the justice system has failed. And I want to thank you quite personally for what you did when the state of Connecticut mounted an unexpected attack on the writers of York CI, whose collective crime was to have gotten so good at expressing themselves that their work became publishable. In response, or I suppose I should say in retaliation, the state sued these writers at $117 a day for the cost of their imprisonment. Now, eventually, it all came out okay. 60 Minutes got interested, I think largely because of Andy. The lawsuit got settled. One of the writers, as has been mentioned, Barbara Parsons Lane, won the International First Amendment Award, and the legislature even changed the law so that it is now illegal for Connecticut to sue its inmates for rehabilitative work. But before any of that happened, when the York writers and I were dog pedaling in shark-infested waters, Andy published an editorial supporting us titled, "Tear Down Those Liens, Mr. Blumenthal." And I want to tell you, Andy, that at that confusing and scary and demoralizing time, it was the life raft that we needed to stay afloat. I'm willing to bet that Andy has gone to bat in some way or shape or form for the majority of people in this room, and so invite you all to stand up and salute two good guys, Bill Cibes and Andy Tebow. Would you please join me in giving these guys a round of applause? I once gave Andy a compliment over the phone, and he's cut me off mid-sentence, and he said, yeah, that's just what we do. I'd like to read you a little sneak peek at my novel that I've been working on, or it's been working on me or something, for about 7 years. It's called The Hour I First Believed. It's about a guy named Caleb Quirk. He's the protagonist of the story. He grew up on a dairy farm next to a women's prison. And this is Caleb's voice when he was 8 years old. The corn maze at our farm doesn't open until 10 o'clock, and it's only 8 o'clock, and so the rope is hanging across the entrance between the two sawhorses, and the keep out sign is up. One time, teenagers snuck into the maze at night, and they took the pumpkin family's heads off and they smashed them. Grandpa and me found them on Saturday morning when we were putting out the free hot cocoa. Goddamn juvenile delinquents, Grandpa said. He had to shovel the broken pumpkins back into the back of the truck and hurry and pick out 5 new ones, and Aunt Lolly had to draw on all the new faces quick before the customers came. Juvenile delinquents means teenagers. One of them put a lady's bra on Mrs. Pumpkin over her dress, and she looked weird with a bra and no head on. The pumpkin's insides looked like smashed brains. When you figure out the maze and you get into the middle where the pumpkin family is, that's when you get your free cocoa. It's on the table in 2 big thermos jugs, and there's cups and ladle and a sign that says, 1 cup per customer, please, because some people are pigs. The pumpkin family is Mr. and Mrs. Pumpkin and their son and daughter and their little baby in the baby buggy that used to be my baby buggy. We stuff them in with newspapers and corn husks, and they wear our old clothes. And this year, the boy is wearing my last year's dungarees and my rippy shirt that I chewed a hole in the front of when I tried out for Little League, and my Davy Crockett coonskin cap. I didn't want my coonskin cap anymore after Grandpa told me that the fur tail looked like it had the mange. I yanked it off and I threw it in the toy chest, but Aunt Lolly sewed it back on for the pumpkin boy. First time I ever had to thread a needle since home economics, she said. Damn, I hated that class. My brother got to go to woodworking and make a knick-knack shelf, and I had to do all that prissy sewing. You know what? The people that go into our corn maze are stupid. First they run down all the dead ends and go, huh? And then they go back the same paths that they already went on, and they don't even realize it. And some people get so mixed up, they end up back at the entrance. I am not supposed to show anybody the shortcuts. Folks want to get a little lost for a while, Caleb, Grandpa Quirk told me. That's the fun of it. And anyway, nobody likes a little know-it-all. In the desk out in the barn, there's this map that Daddy drew. It shows what the maze looks like if you're a helicopter flying over it or the geese. Daddy invented the maze back when he was being good. He is the one who thought up the pumpkin family, too, and the free hot cocoa. Mother makes it on the stove in 2 big pots, and then she pours it into the big jugs that she got when she used to work at American Thermos. She quit there, though, because her boss was always yelling at everybody, and it gave her an ulcer. Now Mother works at the bank, and she likes that better, except she has to wash her hands all the time because money is dirty and you never know where it's been. I licked $1 once. Mother made me put Listerine in my mouth and not spit it out for a long time, and it really hurt. Sometimes my scary dreams are about Daddy, and sometimes they're about Mr. Zadzilko. Our school used to have a different janitor, Mr. Tybosh, but he got fired, and I was mad because Mr. Tybosh was nice. The teachers think Mr. Zadzilko is nice, too, because he brings them snapdragons and these stupid Polish donuts that his mother makes called punchkis. Mr. Zadzilko is not nice, though. When the teachers go to the toilet, he peeks at them through his secret hole. Before Mr. Tybosh got fired, he came to our class once and he told us about these people called the Bushmen that are his relatives or his ancestors or something, and he showed us where they live on the world map in Africa near the bottom. You know what Bushmen hunt and eat? Jackals. and desert rats. And when they see a praying mantis, they think it's God. Mr. Tybosh had our class all sit together, even Miss Hogan. Us kids sat cross-legged, and Miss Hogan knelt on her knees, and her skirt made a big circle around her. And Mr. Tybosh told us a story about how Mantis made the moon by throwing fire into the night sky, and how he married a snake. And you know how Mantis travels around between the toes of an antelope, because that's his favorite animal. Mr. Tybosh talked Bushman talk with these little clicky noises before the words, and everybody laughed, even Miss Hogan, and Mr. Tybosh laughed his high squealing laugh too. Mr. Tybosh is colored, I think, except he doesn't have chocolate skin. It's more like the color of those dried apricots that Grandpa gets at Christmas time. After his visit, our class wrote Mr. Tybosh a thank you letter on big easel paper, and we all signed it. And it made him so happy that he gave us a present, a praying mantis egg case. And it was supposed to hatch in April, but it didn't. And then after the assembly, Mr. Tybosh got fired, and Miss Hogan was going to throw out the egg case, but I asked her if I could have it, and she said yes, and so I brought it home, and I put it on my windowsill. I caught Mr. Zadzilko peeking. That's how I know about the hole. It's in the big second-floor closet where the buckets and the mops and the spick and span are. Miss Hogan wrote me a pass, and she sent me down to help him because I was the first one done with my social studies questions, and I had ants in my pants, and I kept bothering my neighbors. I opened the closet door, and Mr. Zadzilko was peeking through the hole, and he jumped up when he saw me, and he fixed his pants and his belt, and he was laughing like, "Look at this," he said. "Mop handle must have poked a hole in the wall. I got to patch it when I get a free minute." He gave me the sponge, and he told me to wet it in the boys' room and then go downstairs and wipe the cafeteria tables. And after, when the recess bell rang, I went back upstairs to return my sponge. Mr. Zadzilko wasn't there, and so I turned a bucket upside down, and I climbed up, and I looked through the hole, and there was the principal, Miss Anderson. She was sitting on the toilet smoking a cigarette, and you could see her girdle. I knew it was naughty to look, and so I closed my eyes, and I got down off the bucket. And when I turned around, Mr. Zadzilko was standing there. My, he said. "Aren't you the dirty little boy?" He yanked the pull chain, and the closet light went on. And then he pulled the door closed behind him. And he came over and he sat down on the bucket so that he was whispering in my face. And the hole was a secret between me and him, he said. And if I said anything, he was going to tell the teachers that he caught me looking. "You were just curious," he said. "I understand that, but the teachers won't. They're probably going to have you arrested, and then everybody will know that you're the dirty boy." The teacher behind him, he reached behind him, and he took a greasy paper bag off the shelf, and he opened it, and he held it out to me. "Here," he said, "help yourself." And I reached in and pulled out one of those donut things that his mother makes. "They're called punchkis," he said. "Take a bite. They're delicious." I didn't want to, but I did. "What are you, a little mouse nibbling on a crumb? Take a big bite," he said. And so I did, and the stuff inside looked like bloody nose. "What kind did you get?" he said. "Prune or raspberry?" And I showed him where I'd bitten. "Oh, raspberry," he said. "That's my favorite, too." "What are you shaking for, dirty boy?" I tried to stop shaking, but I couldn't, and he kept looking at me. "You know what punchki means, don't you, in Polish?" I shook my head. It means little package, because the donut makes a little package around the stuff that's inside of it. You see that? "Oh," I said, "can I go now? It's recess." Like us males carry the stuff that's inside of us in our sacks. You get it? I didn't know what he was talking about, but I nodded yes. "You don't look like you get it, dirty boy. If you get it, show me your punchki." "What?" "Your little package." "Where is it? Point to it." I could hear kids playing outside, but they sounded farther away than the playground, and I was trying not to cry. Mr. Zadzilko made an O with his thumb and his pointing finger. "Here's the woman's hole, you see," he said, "otherwise known as her snatch or her pussy." And he leaned closer and he dropped his hand down. "And this, my dirty boy, is where your little package is." And he flicked his finger hard against my nuts, and it hurt. "It's recess," I said. "I'm supposed to go." "Go then," he said. "But you just remember what happens to boys with big mouths." The hallway was empty. There was laughter coming out of the teacher's room. I went downstairs to the boys' room. I had not swallowed that bite that he made me take. I had hidden it against my cheek, and I spit it into the toilet, and I threw the rest of my punchki in after it. And I kept flushing, and it kept swirling around and looking like it was going to go down, but then it would bob back up again. And I thought, what if he's got a lookout hole in here, too? What if he is watching me flush his mother's stupid donut down the toilet? And by the time I got out to the playground, I had a stomachache. And then the recess bell rang 2 seconds later, and we had to go back in. And that night, I was lying in bed thinking about Mr. Zadzilko. And Mother came into my room in the dark. "Caleb," she said, "are you awake or asleep?" I didn't answer her for a long time. And then I said, "Awake." "I heard you crying," she said. "What were you crying about?" I almost told her, and then I didn't. "I was thinking about Jesus dying on the cross," I said, "and it was making me sad." I knew she'd like that answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll conclude our evening with closing remarks by the man, Bill Cibes.
I want, first of all, to echo what Wally said about Andy Tebow. This organization, the Impact CSU Writers Trust, would be nowhere without Andy Tebow. Obviously, Jim Irwin has funded much of the activity. Our trustees at CSU have been very generous in support, but the active soul involved has been Andy, and we thank him very much. When I retire, as I've told people this evening and other times, I plan to write. My wife has told me that I owe her a book, so I have to deliver that. I'm going to be writing about the topic of my dissertation, which I finished 30 years ago, on extrajudicial activities of Supreme Court justices. It remains a topical item, I think. And I hope to be a bit more analytical than I was 30 years ago. But I know that I will never be able to capture the emotions and use words as skillfully, like a scalpel, as creative writers do. I sort of bludgeon words to make them fit, and I am not brief. Someone mentioned this evening that the hallmark of the particularly gifted is brevity. That is not one of my hallmarks. My dissertation was 1,500 pages long with 480 pages of footnotes. So it needs to be condensed, among other things. It needs a good editor. But my real regret is that I haven't been able to be as powerful in capturing emotions as creative writers are, as Marilyn Nelson, as Leo Connellan, as Vivian Shipley, as Rand Cooper, as all of our creative writers are, as Franz Dusky, capturing the emotions and being able to express them in such powerful ways. So I will always be trying to do that, and always probably failing. But I want to encourage the young writers, who are our hope for the future, to continue doing so well what our four winners have indicated this evening that they can do. Leo Connellan, as the poet in residence for the Connecticut State University system, hired, by the way, not by me, but by our Board of Trustees, who showed such great faith in Leo, supported originally, I believe, by President Carter at Easter. Leo Connellan spent much of his time as the poet in residence visiting high schools and middle schools, as has been noted, supporting and creating enthusiasm for writing among those students. And I spoke with Candy earlier this evening and her mother, who remembered that in fact Leo had visited her school. And she had come home that evening and said what a difference that visit had made in her life. Well, that's the gratifying part of education and what Leo did and what we at CSU do every day. We have such great talent in our higher educational system, particularly, with all apologies to Marilyn, at the Connecticut State University system. We are using it, we hope, to support the writers of the future. Our presidents, President Miller, President Norton, President Schmatter, President Carter, who could not be with us this evening because he's got pneumonia, who is our new chancellor, I think are all committed to continuing this great support. And even though it's a bit saccharine, I'm continually reminded of the message of the short story and, or maybe a novel, I guess, by Catherine Ryan Hyde, which was turned into a movie starring Kevin Spacey, about pay it forward. And if we all lived our lives by paying it forward rather than paying it back, this would always be a much better world. Thank you very much. Thank you for the honor.